Mason's heart thundered as he stood in the shadowed corner of the grand ballroom. The clink of champagne glasses and laughter slicing through the air like a blade. He was invisible here, a ghost at his own parents' 30th anniversary celebration. Hidden not by choice, but by necessity, because loving Ethan meant living a lie. Tonight, though, something in him burned brighter than fear. A spark that could either light his world or reduce it to ashes. The ballroom of the historic Charleston estate glowed with opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms across the polished oak floors, and tables draped in ivory linens groaned under the weight of gourmet hors d'oeuvres. Guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns mingled, their voices a symphony of privilege and tradition. Mason, 25, stood apart, his sharp navy blazer and crisp white shirt blending seamlessly with the crowd. Yet his piercing blue eyes darted nervously toward the stage at the room's center. His parents, Richard and Evelyn Harper, stood there now, basking in applause, their smiles practiced and perfect. They were Charleston's golden couple, pillars of the community, their legacy built on old money and older expectations. Mason, their only son, was meant to inherit that legacy, but he carried a secret that could shatter it. He adjusted his tie, fingers trembling, and glanced at Ethan, who lingered near the open bar. Ethan, 26, was everything Mason wasn't: bold, unapologetic, with warm brown eyes that held a quiet defiance. His charcoal suit hugged his athletic frame, a lavender pocket square adding a subtle flair that screamed confidence. They'd met 2 years ago at a dive bar in Atlanta, where Ethan's laughter had pulled Mason out of his carefully curated shell. Now, their love was a fragile rebellion, hidden from everyone in this room, especially Mason's parents. "You okay?" Ethan's voice was low, his hand brushing Mason's briefly as he approached, a stolen touch that sent warmth flooding through Mason's veins. "No," Mason admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I'm suffocating." Ethan's lips curved into a small, reassuring smile. "You don't have to do this tonight. We can leave. Grab a burger. Watch the stars. Just us." Mason wanted to say yes, to run from this gilded cage and never look back. But something had shifted in him over the past week, ever since his mother had casually mentioned finding him a nice girl at Sunday brunch. The words had landed like a punch, reminding him that his life was a performance, what he was tired of playing. Tonight, with the entire town watching, he felt the weight of every lie he'd told to protect his parents' image. He wasn't just their son, he was their secret keeper, and the burden was crushing him. "I can't keep doing this," Mason said, his voice cracking. "Hiding who I am, who we are. It's killing me." Ethan's eyes softened, but there was a flicker of fear in them too. "Mason, this is your family. Your world. If you do this, there's no going back." "I know," Mason said, his jaw tightening. "That's why I have to." The band struck up a slow waltz, and couples flooded the dance floor, their laughter mingling with the music. Mason's parents descended from the stage, their arms linked, the picture of marital bliss. Richard, tall and silver-haired, exuded authority in his black tuxedo, while Evelyn's emerald gown shimmered under the lights, her smile as polished as the diamonds at her throat. They didn't see Mason, didn't know he was about to unravel everything they'd built. He'd planned this moment for weeks, ever since he'd overheard his father's dismissive comment about those people at a country club dinner. The words had cut deeper than Mason expected, not because they were new, but because they were a reminder of the life he was expected to live: a wife, kids, a corner office, and a heart buried under layers of denial. He'd written a speech, rehearsed it in the mirror until the words felt like his own skin. Tonight, he would take the stage, not as the dutiful son, but as himself, raw, real, and unapologetically gay. The MC, a jovial man with a booming voice, stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue the festivities, we have a special moment planned. Let's give a warm welcome to Mason Harper, who has something to share with us tonight. The room erupted in polite applause, and Mason's stomach lurched. Ethan squeezed his hand one last time, a silent anchor in the storm. "You've got this," he whispered. Mason stepped into the spotlight, the weight of 100 eyes pressing against him. His parents' smiles faltered, confusion flickering across their faces. He gripped the microphone, his knuckles white, and took a breath that felt like it might be his last. The silence in the ballroom was deafening, a collective intake of breath as Mason stood alone on the stage, the microphone trembling in his hand. He could feel the heat of the spotlight, the weight of expectation, and the sharp sting of his parents' gazes boring into him. He hadn't told them he'd be speaking tonight, hadn't warned them that their perfect anniversary was about to become something else entirely. "Thank you all for being here," Mason began, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. "Tonight, we're celebrating my parents, Richard and Evelyn Harper, for 30 years of love, commitment, and sacrifice. They've built a life that's the envy of Charleston, a legacy of strength and tradition." The crowd murmured approval, a few clapping softly. His mother's smile returned, tentative but relieved, as if she thought this was just another toast. His father's eyes narrowed, sensing something off. Mason's heart raced, but he pressed on, the words he'd rehearsed spilling out like a confession. "But there's another story I need to tell tonight," he said, his voice growing stronger. "One that's been hidden for too long. A story about love and about truth." The room stilled. Mason's eyes found Ethan's across the crowd, a beacon in the sea of faces. Ethan nodded, a small gesture that anchored him. Mason took another breath, the air thick with anticipation. "I've spent my whole life trying to be the son my parents wanted," he continued. "The one who'd follow in their footsteps, uphold their values, carry their name. But there's a part of me I've kept hidden, not because I'm ashamed, but because I was afraid. Afraid of losing their love, their respect, afraid of losing all of you." Whispers rippled through the crowd, a low hum of curiosity and unease. His mother's hand flew to her necklace, her fingers twisting the diamonds nervously. His father's face hardened, a storm brewing behind his eyes. "I'm gay," Mason said, the words ringing out clear and unshakable. "And I'm in love with someone who makes me feel more alive than I ever thought possible. His name is Ethan, and he's standing right there." He pointed to Ethan, who stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, his expression a mix of pride and fear. The room was silent, a void so profound it seemed to swallow sound itself. Mason's heart pounded, but he couldn't stop now. The truth was a river, and he was caught in its current. "I know this isn't what you expected to hear tonight," he said, his voice softening. I know it might change how you see me, how you see my family, but I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. Love isn't something to hide. It's not a sin, or a flaw, or a mistake. It's the truest thing I've ever known. A woman near the front gasped, her hand covering her mouth. An older man in a bow tie shook his head, muttering to his wife. Mason's mother looked like she might faint, her face pale against the green of her gown. His father's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "I'm not asking for your approval," Mason said, his gaze sweeping the room. "I'm asking for your understanding, for your willingness to see me, not as a scandal or a disappointment, but as a person." As Mason, the silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then, from the back of the room, a single pair of hands began to clap. Ethan. His applause was slow, deliberate, a quiet rebellion against the stunned crowd. A few others joined in hesitantly, their claps scattered like raindrops before a storm. Mason's eyes locked with his father's, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Richard's face was a mask of fury and betrayal. But beneath it, Mason saw something else, fear. Fear of what this meant, not just for their family, but for the carefully constructed world they'd built. "Thank you," Mason said, his voice breaking as he stepped back from the microphone. He left the stage, his legs unsteady, and made his way to Ethan. The crowd parted, their whispers following him like a shadow. Ethan pulled him into a fierce embrace, his arms a fortress against the world. "You were incredible," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Mason didn't respond. He couldn't. The weight of what he'd done was crashing over him, a tidal wave of relief and terror. He'd spoken his truth. But what cost? The aftermath was a blur. Mason and Ethan slipped out of the ballroom. The cool night air a sharp contrast to the stifling tension inside. The Charleston Estates gardens stretched before them, moonlit roses casting long shadows across the gravel path. Mason's heart still raced, his hands shaking as he leaned against a stone bench, Ethan's hand resting on his shoulder. "I can't believe I did that," Mason said, his voice barely audible. "Did you see their faces? My parents, they looked like I'd burned their world down." "You did what you needed to do," Ethan said, his tone firm but gentle. "You were honest. That's more than most people in that room will ever be." Mason laughed, a bitter edge to it. "Honest? I just drop a bomb on their perfect night. They'll never forgive me." Ethan turned him, his hands framing Mason's face. "Listen to me. You don't need their forgiveness. You need to live your truth. And you just took the first step." Mason wanted to believe him, but the weight of his parents' disappointment was a physical ache. He'd grown up in their world, shaped by their expectations. Richard, a successful lawyer, had mapped out Mason's future: law school, a partnership at the firm, a wife from a good family. Evelyn, ever the socialite, had orchestrated his life like a gala, every detail curated. Coming out wasn't just a personal act. It was a rebellion against their entire legacy. "Let's walk," Ethan suggested, taking Mason's hand. They wandered deeper into the garden, the scent of jasmine heavy in the air. For a moment, it was just them, the world reduced to the warmth of Ethan's fingers laced with his own. "Do you regret it?" Ethan asked after a long silence. Mason stopped, his eyes tracing the stars above. "No," he said finally. I'm scared as hell, but I don't regret it. For the first time, I feel free. Ethan smiled, pulling him close. Their lips met, soft and urgent, a kiss that tasted of courage and defiance. Mason let himself sink into it, the world fading until it was just Ethan's warmth, his strength, his love. But the moment was fleeting. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind them, and Mason pulled back, his heart lurching. His father stood at the edge of the path, his silhouette stark against the garden's soft glow. Richard's face was unreadable, but his presence alone was enough to make Mason's stomach twist. "We need to talk," Richard said, his voice low and controlled, the kind he used in courtrooms to command attention. Ethan squeezed Mason's hand, a silent question. Mason nodded, and Ethan stepped back, giving them space but staying close enough to be a quiet support. "Dad," Mason started, but Richard held up a hand. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Richard's voice was a blade, sharp and cold. "This family has a reputation, a legacy. And you just threw it away for what?" For him, Mason's throat tightened, but he held his father's gaze. "I didn't throw anything away. I told the truth. I'm your son, Dad, not a prop for your legacy." Richard's eyes flashed. "You think this is about you? This is about all of us. Your mother is in there, humiliated. Our friends, our colleagues, they're all talking. You've made us a spectacle." The word stung, but Mason stood taller. "I'm not a spectacle. I'm your son, and I'm gay. If that's a problem for your friends, maybe they're not the kind of people you should be around." Richard's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Mason thought he might walk away. But instead, he took a step closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You don't get to lecture me, Mason. You've had everything handed to you, private schools, connections, a future. And this is how you repay us." Mason's eyes burned, but he refused to look away. "I never asked for that future. I just wanted to be me." Richard stared at him, the silence between them heavy with years of unspoken expectations. Then he turned and walked back toward the estate, his footsteps echoing in the night. Mason didn't sleep that night. He and Ethan drove back to their small apartment in downtown Charleston, the city's historic charm feeling like a mockery of the chaos in his heart. The apartment was a sanctuary, filled with mismatched furniture, books they'd read aloud to each other, and the faint scent of Ethan's cedarwood cologne. But even here, Mason couldn't escape the weight of what he'd done. He sat on the couch, staring at his phone, the screen dark. No calls, no texts, not from his parents, not from anyone. The silence was louder than the ballroom had been. Ethan sat beside him, his presence a quiet comfort. "They'll come around," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "They're your parents. They love you." Mason shook his head. "You didn't see my dad's face. It wasn't just anger. It was betrayal. Like I'd stabbed him in the back." Ethan reached for his hand, his thumb tracing circles over Mason's knuckles. "You didn't betray him. You chose yourself." "That's not the same thing." Mason wanted to believe him, but the doubt was a gnawing ache. He thought of his mother, her face pale and stricken, and wondered if she'd ever look at him the same way again. He thought of the life he'd been groomed for, now slipping through his fingers like sand. And yet, beneath the fear, there was a spark of something new, relief, raw and unfamiliar. The next morning, the fallout began. Mason's phone buzzed with notifications, not from his parents, but from others. Friends from college sent supportive messages, some laced with awkwardness, others with genuine warmth. A cousin he hadn't spoken to in years sent a simple, "Proud of you." But there were others, acquaintances, family friends, who unfollowed him on social media. Their silence, a quiet rejection. By noon, a local gossip blog had picked up the story. Charleston Air comes out at Parents' Gala, the headline screamed, accompanied by a grainy photo of Mason on stage, his face a mix of defiance and vulnerability. The comment section was a battlefield, some praising his courage, others calling him a disgrace. Mason read them until Ethan gently took his phone away. "Don't do this to yourself," Ethan said, his voice firm. "The people who matter will stand by you. The rest, they don't get to define you." Mason nodded, but the words fell hollow. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for them, for the life they wanted to build together. Ethan had grown up in a small Georgia town, where being openly gay meant risking everything. He'd fought his own battles, carved out his own freedom, and now he was Mason's anchor. But Mason couldn't shake the fear that his choice had put Ethan in the crosshairs of his family's world. That afternoon, Mason's mother called. Her voice was tight, each word carefully chosen. "Mason, we need to talk. Can you come to the house?" He agreed, though every instinct screamed to run. Ethan offered to come, but Mason shook his head. "This is something I need to do alone." The Harper family home was a sprawling antebellum mansion, its white columns and manicured lawn a testament to their status. Evelyn met him at the door, her face composed but her eyes red-rimmed. She led him to the sitting room, where the air felt heavy with unspoken words. "I don't understand," she said finally, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Why didn't you tell us? Why did you have to do it like that? In front of everyone?" Mason's throat tightened. "I tried, Mom. I tried to fit into your world, to be the son you wanted. But I couldn't keep lying. Not to you, not to myself." Her eyes filled with tears. "We love you, Mason. But it's not what we raised you to be." The words cut deeper than he expected, but he held her gaze. "You raised me to be honest, to be brave. That's what I was last night." Evelyn looked away, her hands trembling. "Your father, he's not ready to talk. He's angry, Mason. Not just at you, but at himself. He thinks he failed you." Mason's heart ached, but he shook his head. "He didn't fail me. He just doesn't know me." "Not really." Days turned into weeks, and the silence from Mason's father grew heavier. Evelyn called occasionally, her conversation strained but laced with a tentative hope. She asked about Ethan, her voice hesitant, as if testing the waters. Mason answered honestly, sharing small details about their life together. The way Ethan burned toast but made the best coffee. The way they dance in their living room to old jazz records. Each call felt like a step, small but significant, toward something new. But the world outside their apartment was less forgiving. Charleston's elite circles buzzed with gossip, and Mason felt the weight of their judgment everywhere he went. At a coffee shop, a former family friend avoided his gaze. At the grocery store, whispers followed him down the aisle. He'd expected backlash, but the reality was a slow, grinding erosion of the life he'd known. Ethan, ever the optimist, tried to keep him grounded. They spent evenings exploring the city, finding refuge in its hidden corners, quiet bookstores, hole-in-the-wall diners, the boardwalk where the ocean stretched endless and free. Ethan's laughter was a lifeline, pulling Mason back from the edge of doubt. One night, as they sat on a bench overlooking the harbor, Ethan turned to him, his eyes serious. "What do you want, Mason? Not what your parents want. Not what this city wants. What do you want?" Mason thought for a long moment, the waves crashing softly in the distance. "I want a life where I don't have to hide. Where we don't have to hide. I want to build something real. With you." Ethan smiled, his hand finding Mason's. "Then let's do it. Whatever it takes." The next day, Mason made a decision. He'd been working at his father's law firm, a job he'd taken to please Richard. But it was a cage. Every day, a reminder of the life he was supposed to live. He submitted his resignation, effective immediately. The relief was immediate, like shedding a skin that had never fit. He started looking for work that felt like his own, something creative, something human. He landed a job at a local nonprofit, helping at-risk youth, many of whom were struggling with their own identities. The work was exhausting but fulfilling, each day a reminder that he wasn't alone in his fight. Meanwhile, Ethan was building his own path. A graphic designer, he'd started taking on freelance projects, his work vibrant and unapologetic. Together, they dreamed of a future where they could live openly, maybe even leave Charleston for a city where their love wouldn't be a headline. But the past wasn't done with them. One evening, as Mason was leaving the nonprofit's office, he found his father waiting in the parking lot. Richard looked older, his shoulders slumped, his eyes tired. "Mason," he said, his voice rough. "Can we talk?" They drove to a quiet diner, the kind of place where no one cared about their last name. Over coffee, Richard spoke, his words halting but sincere. "I've been thinking about what you said. About being honest. I don't understand this. Mason, I don't know if I ever will. But I don't want to lose you." Mason's heart clenched. "You won't lose me, Dad. But you have to accept me, all of me. And that includes Ethan." Richard nodded slowly, his eyes distant. "I'm trying. It's not easy, but I'm trying." It wasn't a promise, but it was a start. For the first time, Mason saw a crack in his father's armor, a glimpse of the man behind the legacy. Months later, Mason stood in the same garden where he'd kissed Ethan the night of the anniversary party. The roses were in bloom again, their petals vibrant against the fading light. Ethan stood beside him, their hands intertwined, their laughter soft as they planned a trip to New York, a city where they could be just another couple, anonymous and free. The journey hadn't been easy. Mason's relationship with his parents was still fragile, a work in progress. Evelyn had started inviting Ethan to family dinners, her efforts awkward but genuine. Richard was slower to come around, but he'd begun asking questions, listening more than he spoke. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was something. Mason's work at the nonprofit had become his purpose. He'd found a community there, people who saw him for who he was, not who he was supposed to be. He'd started mentoring a teenager named Lucas, a quiet boy who'd been kicked out of his home for being gay. Through Lucas, Mason saw his own struggles reflected, but also his own strength. One evening, as Mason and Ethan sat on their apartment's balcony, the city lights twinkling below. Mason felt a peace he hadn't known was possible. He'd taken the stage that night, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd ever felt forced to hide. His truth had cost him friends, status, the life he'd been groomed for, but it had given him something greater, freedom. "I love you," Mason said, turning to Ethan, his voice steady and sure. Ethan grinned, his eyes warm. "I know. And I love you too." They kissed, the world around them fading to nothing. Mason didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid. He'd spoken his truth, and in the silence that followed, he'd found his voice. The room that night had been silent, but it was a silence that echoed with possibility. It was the sound of a world shifting, of a heart breaking open, of a life finally lived on its own terms.